Hello and welcome to another free code session. My name is Jason Bach and this should be a short one. I'm not going to do any code. I'm just going to talk about what I just fixed from the previous episode, and then I'm going to go into some other things I just found and what's going to be coming up. I have thought of maybe putting some of those into another release and fixing those bugs, but I'm just going to group them all together and get that done. There's other things I need to get done today, last day of my vacation, and I want to make sure I get to those before the workday starts tomorrow again. So this one, I think I left from the last episode, which is I understood what it needed to do, but trying to fix it, I think was going to take a little bit of time. So I did get around to fixing it. As you can see, it's closed. What I did basically is create these extension methods on specific symbol types. So for example, can be seen by containing assembly, a method symbol. The interesting thing about this, because I had to do it for events, for properties, and then also types as well, is that by having a more specific signature or type, to be more precise, all of a sudden other methods picked up on, oh, I should call this one, which ended up breaking like 20 odd tests. And I just had to go in and fix them. It wasn't a big deal, but it also showed that there was a couple things that I was assuming in some tests that I needed to fix anyway. So that was good. So for example, I'm not going to go through all of them, but for example, you can see I still have to test the main one, which just looks at, does it have the right either accessibility or visibility? I think I use those terms interchangeably and I shouldn't. But what I'm doing here first is to see, is that possible? And if it is, now for a method, I need to look at all the parameters types. Are they visible? And then look to say either we return void or the return type can be seen. I was thinking of maybe attributes. That might be something else I need to look at, but I'm not sure. So I just left that off for now. And properties and events do basically the same thing. For the type, as you can imagine, that gets a little bit more complicated because there are all sorts of special types. And so here we first look to see if you're a dynamic or a type parameter. Then and this method is called a lot because all the things eventually come down to looking at types. So we look at these. If these are true, then yes, they're accessible. If it's a function pointer, we got to grab the signature and then get the parameters and do the return void, and then that works. If it's a pointer, we look at the pointed at type. If it's an array, we look at the element type. And then we start going through some cases, and this is really where the bug was initially, which is if it was protected or internal, then we had to look at if how to say this, if it was accessible, and if it was generic, we had to go back up here and say, okay, now look at all the type arguments and see if they're accessible. And so you end up calling, not recursively, but you keep going through until you eventually come to a resolution of, is this visible or not? And that ended up seeming to solve the problem. The one thing I was thinking about yesterday, though, is I still don't like that I can't do this, because it's interesting. The mock can be made. So the mock gets generated and nothing's wrong from that standpoint, because a subtype of this type here can still see section. It can still see that type, and so it can return that, and everything's fine. The problem becomes with the extension methods that I create for all of the expectation setups. And so I don't like this. I don't like that I can't do this. And I was thinking, is there any possible way to do this without resorting to what they call it, stringified, or what's the phrase? I think I used it in a previous episode, string safety or something like that, where you give a name of something and that's what says that's the thing that actually is the type name here, and then you got to do reflection stuff, and it gets ugly. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. But the only way to actually do this is to have an extension method, or the extension methods, on the mock type, because that derives from the type, this type in this case. And then it could see it. I'm almost positive. Then it could actually see it. But then the problem is that the mock type now has to be made public. It's currently private. And I want to keep it that way because it's something that I don't think anybody should have to be able to see. And so keeping it as I think it's a nested private type is the right thing to do. In fact, if I go to one of my tests, and it doesn't matter which test it is because they all do this. If I look at any of these tests, we should see that it's a private in this one. Okay. And so I don't want to make that public. I really don't, because there's just no reason to. It's an implementation detail. But without that, then there's no way to do it other than to have all of the classes down here that get created for those to arbitrarily derive from that mock type as well. And that's really gross, because it's almost like it has to suddenly do a make type of it. And we really don't want to do that. So this is going to be just stuck in the back of my head, but I really don't think there's going to be a way to do this unless I can think of something clever, but is still type safe and still does the right thing. So at least in this way, we won't create these methods or we won't create these mock types, because it would create a compilation error if we did. And that's actually not what we want to do. So we will potentially solve this later, but for now it's put to rest. So what I found are a whole bunch of other things now, and most of them come from Entity Framework, no surprise. So let's see. Is this one? What's this one? Oh yeah, I don't have a code snippet for this, but this showed up because something was being created and I was looking at the property setters and the types. When it's explicit, we're not actually creating a fully qualified name. And I couldn't come up with a test off the top of my head to actually address this, but at least I know where the problem is. I do need to create a test case for this just to make sure that we are covering this. So for whatever reason, that one popped up and I'm like, why did I not handle that correctly? But I don't. The next one is, this one's showing up a lot. It is if you have a not null, if not null, attribute on a method, it needs to return. And what's ending up happening is, you can see here, it doesn't put return here. And so you get this error showing up. So once I fix that, then that should take care of a lot of problems that are happening in EF, though not all of them. And let's see. Oh yeah, duplicate member and shims. I'm not sure. This test here, I did come up with one to show it. And I believe, as I say here in the notes, that when I create a shim, which is needed for default interface members, I'm just automatically creating members that I find regardless for some reason. I'm not saying that actually the way I want to, but I don't think I'm doing the correct logic to actually handle. In this case, the problem becomes you have properties here, and then you also have new. And so I think this one, or really this one, I'm not sure. One of these, they're both being created, but one of them needs to be explicit because the name, it's a getter, and so it's not doing that correctly. So that's one I'm going to have to fix. And then duplicate member generation. This one I also have a test on. I'm doing things like you have an abstract object and then you have an override, but then it's kind of that same case I had before where you end up having two methods that are the same. For some reason, I'm not picking this up here. So I'm not sure why that's happening. A conditional attribute, this one hopefully should be easy because you can't put a conditional attribute on something that you are inheriting from. It says, conditional attribute is not valid. What does it say here? Because this is an override method. So in that case, you just can't do it. So you wouldn't put it there. That one should be easy. And then this last one is pretty funny. I actually ran into a method that I put in here 20, it actually had 21. But, sorry, my alarm just went off, and that's to remind me that I have to take my son practicing. He's taking his test on Tuesday and his driver's test. So we need to practice a couple of things with parking. So that's also why this video is going to be a little short, because I just want to go out there and give him some time to practice things that honestly, I have not done in I don't know how many years. So I do it so rarely that I don't even think about it, like parallel parking or 90-degree backing in parking. That it's just like I just don't do it. It rarely, if ever, comes up. So, but he needs to practice it because it can't come up in the test. And I am glad though that one of the things he found, it talked about the fact that 1 in 4 people, like 25% of people, fail their first time. And I think that's good for him to see because it's like they're people that are, smart, or they're still smart, but whatever their intelligence levels are, it's like you do one thing wrong and they'll just fail you. So it just happens sometimes. So, but I'm hoping he goes and just does his best and see what happens. But that's why I have to stop soon. So this one, I ran into a method with 21 parameters, and unfortunately, a func can only go up to 16. Same thing with an action. So I probably had a thought of this at some point. I just never got around to fixing it. But in those cases, we're going to have to create a custom delegate to handle when we use funcs or actions for these cases. So, it just, one of those things, having a method that had 21 parameters was like, oh, but it's in EF for what it's worth. Runtime entity type. I'm like, okay, I guess 21 parameters, but that does break rocks. We should be able to create a delegate that handles that case and then just move on from that point. So those are the things I got to address in the near future. I will try to do as best as I can over the next month or so. I'm still thinking of the things that are coming in C# 12. I know there's talk about this thing called interceptors. I don't know if that would actually affect rocks in any way, shape, or form. There's part of me that goes, oh, that's like interception, sort of kind of aspect-oriented programming, or maybe not. Maybe that has nothing to do with anything that rocks would have to be concerned about. The other features that I've heard about, I'm not really sure that any of them would impact rocks, but I'm still looking into it. So that is on the docket for the next episodes, along with some other stuff that I want to do. As I've said many times, there's so much to do in coding. There's so much to look at, and it's always fun to learn about new things and things that people do that you don't expect, or like, oh yeah, that's perfectly legal. And I got to handle that. The last thing is I'm going to put in fact, I'm going to put in a new issue right now, which is revisit mockable member determination. And that one is going to be an enhancement, high priority, and we're going to target that for 8. Okay, so I'll fill that out later, but the way that I'm grabbing all the mockable methods, properties, and events, along with the shims and everything else, it just feels brittle. It doesn't feel elegant. It doesn't feel like I'm handling it correctly. There's all these corner cases that pop up, and I need to do a better job. And I don't exactly know what that better job is. But that's another thing that will be on the list later. Now that I have the engine in the right state, I think, at least that's all there, it now needs to change so that the way we're getting all the things can change. And there's also still a couple things in my head about, if we're building at one time and if you're mocking the same type over and over in different tests, which isn't uncommon at all, I think right now the incremental generator will still force us to at least create n number of the read-only models until we get into the first pass, and then that's cached, and then we don't do that again. What I'd really like to say is, here are all the type symbols that I just ran into. Get me a distinct list, and then get the models from that. And I'm not sure if there's a easy way to do that. So yeah, I have to, I think there's still a couple little wins in terms of the generator itself. I'd really like to know is, when I get a type symbol, has that changed from the last time? That would be oh so glorious, because then I wouldn't even have to do generation or not. If this type symbol was what I saw before, then I don't need to do it again. And I need to know if it's changed. Like, it doesn't mean if I've seen it again. It's that if you haven't done any deltas on the type, I'd love to just be able to get like a code version and a hash code of it. I don't know if that'd be very memory performant, but if I knew that it hasn't changed since the last time, there's no reason to go on with the next stuff. So yeah, there's definitely things that need to be, I think, addressed even more, but I'm not even sure what the right paths of that would be. So I'll enter this one, and then the next episode, maybe I just go off to another source code generator that I've created, another source generator, and do some stuff there, or come here and fix some of the bugs. We'll see. Thank you all for watching. Leave comments and questions below. See you in the next episode.